Alezander Zverev has been ranked as high as number 2 in the world. He's beaten the likes of Djokovic, Nadal, Alcaraz, and Federer. He has one of the best backhands of all time, in my opinion. It's a rock-solid shot. However, I believe the reason why he hasn't been able to win a Grand Slam is because of his forehand, which proves to be a weakness, especially in pressure situations. It's liable to break down due to technical issues, which I will be explaining in this video. By the way, please put the video speed to 1.5 as I talk kind of slow. You can see that his hand is around his eye height and his racket's above his head. This is too high, in my opinion. If you compare most pros and his best forehands, such as Alcaraz, Federer, Djokovic, Nadal, none of them have their hands this high. Imagine if instead of the racket you had a weight. That means you would be lifting that weight for the whole duration of your unit turn every single stroke. And I think it's inefficient. It taxes your arm muscles more. But the other thing is it disturbs the orientation of your racket. So because his hand is so high, if he were to cock his wrist such that you make a 90-degree angle between your forearm and your racket, then his racket would be pointing like this instead of being vertical. Whereas if his forearm was lower, if it was like this, then his racket would be more oriented vertically, like Djokovic. It doesn't always have to be exactly at a certain height, but I think Zverev's hand is outside the acceptable range. So we can see that because his hand's so high, his racket is vertical, but his wrist is not cocked. As he brings the racket back, his wrist is still not cocked because you can see there's almost a straight line from here to here. Instead of his racket head at this point being more vertical, it's quite horizontal. And his wrist is just, not really cocked. It's just neutral right now. Getting a cocked wrist is extremely important for generating more topspin and having more control over this shot. So now let's take a look at what happens once he's fully coiled. Let's take a look at this position. We can see that he's done a good job of rotating his shoulders. We can tell that because his shoulder to shoulder plane is perpendicular to the net. Also, his left arm is parallel to the baseline. We can see that his right elbow is just in front of a line that I can draw from his left shoulder to his right shoulder. So his elbow is very close to that line, which is good. And for reference, your elbow should be either in line with that shoulder to shoulder line, or it should be just in front. But it should not be too much in front or too much behind. Those are two common mistakes I see amongst a lot of recreational players. And we can see that he's in a pretty good configuration here, like an ATP style. We got the racket on the right side of his hand. We got the hand on the right side of the elbow. So everything's on the right side of his body, which is good. Now we're going to analyze what happens at the very tail end of his backswing. And what I want you to notice in particular is how his right hand just moves almost straight down. And I'm going to pull up a clip of Federer on the left here, and we're going to see the difference in terms of the side-to-side direction. Watch how Federer's hand, in contrast to Zverev's hand, goes closer to his body. It goes closer to his right hip. So there's almost a straight line you can draw from his shoulder, from his left shoulder to his right shoulder, to his forearm, to his right hand. Whereas Zverev, if we mark where his right hand is, it's right there. And then a few frames later at the bottom of his backswing, it's almost at the same place. It's almost in line with where his hand initially was, instead of being near his hip. The reason it matters is because if his hand is closer to his hip, then there will be more distance that his hand has to travel to get to contact. So from the end of his backswing to contact, there's more distance. And since speed equals distance over time, and the same amount of time that it takes for his hand to travel from the back of his swing to contact, and there's more distance there is to travel, that means his racket will be forced to travel faster to reach contact. So if we look at Djokovic, we can see much more of a triangular swing path from his unit turn to his backswing to his forward swing. Now if we look at Zverev on the right, we can see pretty good racket lag. There's like a 90-degree angle. We can also tell he has good racket lag because his racket is in line with his elbow. So if Zverev has good racket lag, then how come he isn't getting as much power as he could be? Well, if we compare Zverev to Djokovic's backswing, if we look at the transition from backswing to forward swing, look at the difference between Djokovic and Zverev. Look at how Zverev's strings are basically facing the ground, whereas if we look at Djokovic or Federer, we'll notice them supinating, meaning they transition from their strings pointing down to strings starting to face the side fence, the right side fence. This means that Zverev isn't supinating enough. So take a look at this video on the left of Sinner and how he's supinating. We can see his strings facing the side fence. This really takes away from a lot of power. And I think this is one of the main culprits of Zverev's lack of ability to really be offensive with his forehand. When you turn your racket this way to face more so that the strings face the side fence, that goes hand in hand with externally rotating your shoulder, and I'll show what that means in a side view as well. Those two hand in hand help with more stretching of the right arm in relation to the shoulder, so it'll stretch the pecs more and it'll help generate more power. So by not supinating enough, you're limiting the muscles that can be stretched. So we can see here his racket strings are still quite facing the ground. You can also see that the angle of his racket in terms of how horizontal or vertical it is still it's quite vertical, as opposed to his racket tip being more in line with his forearm. So the more your racket tip is below the angle of your forearm, the slower your shot's going to be and the more topspin it will have. If you want to hit a really penetrating, flatter shot, I'll pull up a video of Rublev doing it. You'll be able to see that there's there's more of just a straight line. Not exactly straight because you want some topspin, but more of a straight line from the forearm to the racket tip. And Zverev, he kind of has more of a loopy, weaker shot because he's coming from so low. His racket head is so much lower than his forearm as he's going forward towards contact. So one thing that makes Zverev's forehand weak is watch how right after contact, his racket head, instead of turning over and pronating like some of the other top players do, a lot of times his racket head opens up actually. So it, instead of becoming more closed, it actually starts opening up. This leads to a lot of inconsistencies in his forehand. It doesn't happen all the time, but it happens far more than most other top players. Here's another example. So notice how loosey-goosey and spaghetti arm his forehand looks. The reason that happens is because, as we said earlier, he doesn't have a vertical racket head in the unit turn. He also doesn't pronate enough at the end of his backswing. And as we saw, he doesn't supinate as he starts his forward swing either. The combination of all these things leads to what we're about to see here. Notice how in the frame right after contact, his strings are still open. It's only a couple frames after that his racket head starts to turn over and pronate. If we look at Nadal though, for example, we can see that right after contact, literally the frame after contact, his racket starts turning over, so he's already pronating. If you would like a custom tailored analysis on one of your strokes, please feel free to send me a video. Just for a small price, I can take a look and see what's going wrong and give you some corrections and hopefully help you improve your technique. So guys, let me know what you thought of the video, please. Let me know if you like Zverev's forehand or if you think it needs improvement. Let me know if you agreed with the points I made. And let me know if you think Zverev could win some Grand Slams if he improved his forehand technique.